This is going to be my last contribution for a while. Sometimes saying too much is as bad as saying too little. There is a time to be quiet. My primary focus in the interim will be my spiritual life, which after all is said and done, is the only meaningful thing that cannot be taken away from you. So nourish it well. The following is a commentary on a scene in a movie that is apparently based on real life that always stuck in my craw, and for many that sticking would be obvious. But there was always a story being told in it that resonated beyond the narrative of the screen. An allegory is a story, poem, or picture that can be interpreted to reveal a hidden meaning, typically a moral or political one. And in this scene that is repeated in various renditions, there is an insight to be told within. The Easter Rising was celebrated for most of my life. It was considered a moment of intense heroism, the sacrifice of all sacrifices bettered only by Christ himself. Growing up, I was told by classmates how their granddads, granduncles, or cousins had fought in the GPO or Boland's Mill. So frequent were these stories that in the mind of a child, I believed there must have been hundreds of thousands who fought for Ireland during that Easter in 1916. In reality, only about 1,600 rebels fought in the Rising. Many did, however, dishonestly cleave to the heroism once the fighting was completed. Most people know, or should know, that when the brave men and women of the nationalist cause had been defeated, and en route to their captivity and some their deaths, they were pelted with rotten vegetables and fruit by Dubliners. They were also spat upon and cursed out as they traipsed in shackles past angry bypassers. The daily newspapers were, by and large, exceptionally critical of the sacrifice, especially the Irish Times, which was and remains very much an organ of Southern Unionism and Protestantism. The Irish Times had reported that the back of the insurrection had been broken, with all the buildings occupied by the rebels rescued from their control. The paper heralded the defeat of an insurrection that would pass into history, alongside similarly doomed ventures from the past. Much like the Irish Times today, the assessment of the rebellion and those who staged it was disapproving. In what could be mistaken for an editorial from 2024, the paper focused on the destruction of property and the general distress caused, apparently mainly felt by the poor, as if the same quarters writing or their readership ever really gave a damn about the poor and their crowded tenement death traps. The journalists arrogantly predicted the legacy of the venture to be a long trail of sorrow, misery, and shame. As the days turned into nights and the courts-martial and sentences of the rebel leaders executed, there was no softening in the Irish Times position. If anything, its stance hardened such that on the 6th of May, an editorial in the Irish Times stressed that justice, patriotism, and common sense demand that Ireland be redeemed from the menace of sedition once and for all. In consistent form, the paper of record in Ireland expressed the following: "We said, and we repeat, that the surgeon's knife of the state must not be stayed until the whole malignant growth has been removed. Our demand that the elements of rebellion should be finally extinguished. We have called for the severest punishment of the leaders and responsible agents of the insurrection, but we have insisted there should be no mere campaign of vengeance." It concluded. This, I remind you, is a paper that remains in healthy circulation throughout the life of this fledgling state. Even the more nationalist, moderate leaning daily of the time, the Freeman's Journal, was pejorative in tone when in its own editorial line, emblazoned across its first post-Rising edition on the 4th of May 1916, was unequivocal in its condemnation of the rebellion and those who planned it. The Irish Independent, the paper with the greatest circulation at the time, was adept at playing to the crowd, such that, in the words of one critic, the paper's editor, T.R. Harrington, sought merely to ascertain in what direction the mob was moving and to grovel to its decrees. The initial reportage of the 1916 Rising was conformist in that it denounced it in the harshest of terms, the editorial ship sailing to the winds of the sentiment of the public. From the 24th of April through to May 4th of 1916, the paper editorialized that the insurrection had been an act of criminal madness from which it would take the country many years to recover. It was eager to remonstrate that the shame and dishonor of a rabble force entrenched behind makeshift barricades in Dublin stood in sharp contrast with the heroism and honor of Irishmen fighting in British uniforms in the trenches of France. As the success of the rising was initially dampened, public opinion began to shift as the heroism of the executed reinvigorated the cause for Irish freedom. And typically of the journalist class, they soon changed their tune, some slower than others. By the end of the War of Independence and the Civil War in the distance, the Irish media and their readership had created a mythos of involvement and encouragement. I suspect that for many, it was a means to survival. The present myth of a Catholic theocracy in post-independent Ireland falls to the fact that Protestant and Unionist centres of hegemony in the fledgling state, the Irish Times, the Freemasons, Trinity College Dublin, the Royal College of Surgeons, Guinness Brewery, the Adelaide Hospital, remained unperturbed, some operating open anti-Catholic discrimination well into the 1980s and beyond. Surely if such a Catholic theocracy did exist, then all remnants of the enemy would be purged. The opposite. The first president was Protestant, Douglas Hyde. The scene of the movie I refer to, however, is not Michael Collins, but Titanic. The scenes in the movie cry out to me an allegory of the Sophistico in 1916 as well as today. The Titanic, the unsinkable ship, could be seen representing the creation of the Sophistico, and that the creation is now floundering on the verge of capsizing. Its demise is a result of bad management, but also the arrogance of the creators. However, as the ship creaks to its resting place beneath the waves of chaos, the Sophisticos at the top shamelessly flee. Far removed from his earlier haughtiness in the first-class dining lounge, feted by the sycophants, he, in this case J. Bruce Ismay, makes his shameless escape to survival. J. Bruce Ismay was chairman and managing director of the White Star Line, the owners of the Titanic. It was Ismay who had reduced the number of lifeboats from 48 to 16, plus 4 smaller collapsible Engelhart boats, the minimum standard required by the Board of Trade. Ismay's survival was also his legacy of shame. To many he was a coward. To some he was a prisoner of the chauvinism of the time, where women and children came first and men were expected to die. However, the chivalry of the time, which caused many to perish, he conveniently rejected. The allegory continues thus as the country of Ireland, and indeed other countries across the West, begin to implode from mass immigration, where the wombs of Muslims forgo the abortion abattoirs, reject the sterile cult of the LGBT and meaningless promiscuity. Then as this alien population exponentially grows alongside a native plummet, a new majority is created, and with their own self-interest begin to alter the lex terrae, or law of the land. The new democracy heralds a Sharia state. Allied to this is the turmoil of the new plantation. The neo-plantation has resulted in balkanization equally distributed, where instead of one part of a province, 6 counties to be more precise, was mired in a conflict for cultural supremacy, cultures that in essence were and are quite similar. The other 26 counties join the aged mayhem. Now the entire island has reached the high water mark of the Sophistico. The reign of equality has finally arrived, where misery and disorder, conflict, is now equalized across all the counties, not just confined to 6. And where will the Sophistico be as the island sinks into destruction? They will board the lifeboat, survive, and in their old age, regale the plebs in their safety of their deeds of bravery. If by a miracle the country is restored to former glory, the Sophistico will return and tell the people at the quayside, "I was with you all along, as he gets another pleb to row him into shore on the very vessel he escaped his creation. If you strike us down now, we shall rise again and renew the fight. You cannot conquer Ireland. You cannot extinguish the Irish passion for freedom. If our deed has not been sufficient to win freedom, then our children will win it by a better deed. Padraig Pearse. Erin gobra agus fadakri ustonri.